liberty, equality, fraternity. These were the words that ignited a revolution. But in the end, the only thing left was fear. The streets of Paris ran red as neighbor turned against neighbor. Revolutionaries became executioners. And in the end, even the father of terror could not escape his own creation. How did the dream of freedom turn into a nightmare of bloodshed? Let's go back to the beginning. The monarchy had fallen. The people had stormed the Bastille on July 14, 1789, overthrown centuries of royal rule, and now, in September 1792, the National Convention, the elected assembly that governed France after the fall of the monarchy, declared that France would no longer be ruled by a king. It was now a republic, but for the revolution to be truly complete, there was one final symbol of the old world that had to be destroyed: King Louis XVI himself. The king was put on trial, accused of conspiring with foreign powers to restore his rule. His letters were examined, his every word dissected. Some argued that executing him would only deepen the divide within France. Others saw no alternative. If the revolution was to succeed, it had to show no mercy. Louis defended himself, insisting he had always worked for the good of his people. But it didn't matter. The decision had already been made. The king would die. To better understand Louis XVI's trial, imagine a modern impeachment or high-profile criminal case where a leader's personal letters, decisions, and connections are scrutinized in public courtrooms. The difference? Instead of political fallout or imprisonment, his fate was the guillotine. On January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was led to the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine awaited. As he ascended the scaffold, the air was thick with silence. Some in the crowd wept, others cheered. A drum roll sounded. The executioner raised the blade, and in one swift motion, the monarchy was dead. The execution sent shockwaves through all of Europe. Monarchs in Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Spain saw it as a threat to their own rule. In response, they formed the First Coalition, an alliance of European monarchies determined to stamp out revolutionary ideals before they spread further. A military alliance to crush the French Republic and restore the monarchy. Meanwhile, within France, the execution radicalized the revolution, leading to deeper divisions between moderates and extremists. At that moment, someone in the crowd supposedly dipped a handkerchief in the king's blood, whispering that it was now a relic of the revolution, a chilling sign of how the people had replaced divine monarchy with the worship of radical justice. But what happens when a revolution has no more kings left to kill? With the monarchy abolished, France should have found peace. Instead, it found paranoia. The revolution was far from secure. France found itself surrounded by hostile monarchies intent on crushing the revolution, forcing it into a desperate fight for survival. Internally, factions fought over the future of the Republic. Two groups emerged: the Girondins, who wanted moderation and stability, and the Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre, who believed terror was necessary to protect the revolution. In 1793, the Jacobins took control, and the Committee of Public Safety, the governing body responsible for protecting the revolution, often through extreme measures, was formed. Its leader? Robespierre. To him, the revolution was under siege, and enemies were everywhere. Dissent was treason, doubt was betrayal, and there was only one punishment for betrayal. Under his leadership, the guillotine became more than a tool of justice. It became a weapon of fear. To compare this paranoia to something more familiar, imagine a government using mass surveillance to identify and punish anyone seen as a threat, except, instead of imprisonment or exile, the penalty was death. One of the most notorious victims of this internal conflict was Madame Roland, a prominent Girondin leader who was arrested and executed in November 1793. As she approached the scaffold, she famously exclaimed, "Oh, liberty! What crimes are committed in thy name? To justify the executions, Robespierre argued that virtue and terror were inseparable, famously stating, "Terror is nothing else than swift, severe and inflexible. It is then an emanation of virtue. It is less a distinct principle than a natural consequence of the general principle of democracy, applied to the most pressing wants of the country." And so the bloodletting began. The streets of Paris ran red. The guillotine worked tirelessly. Queen Marie Antoinette was among the first to fall. She had once been France's most hated woman. But as she was dragged through the streets of Paris, her hair, once powdered and perfect, was hacked away. No royal finery, only a simple white dress, her face ghostly pale. The crowd jeered. But as she climbed the scaffold, an uneasy hush fell. Then the blade dropped, her head fell into the basket, and the revolution moved on, hungrier than ever. Then came the law of suspects, a legal decree allowing for the arrest and execution of anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution, often without solid evidence. Passed in September 1793, it made one thing clear: no one was safe. Anyone accused of opposing the revolution could be arrested and executed. It didn't matter how powerful or loyal they once were. The blade did not discriminate. By mid-1794, over 16,000 people had been officially executed, with many more dying in prison or extrajudicially. It is said that executioners worked so quickly that executioners became so overworked that they had to rotate shifts just to keep up with the daily executions, and the guillotine had to be regularly maintained to prevent breakdowns from overuse. The air reeked of death, and carts carrying bodies became a common sight in the streets of Paris. But it was Robespierre's final move that sealed his fate. He turned against his own allies, accusing them of treason. One by one, the revolution devoured its own. But Robespierre's growing paranoia turned deadly. The people who once feared him now began to question, if everyone could be accused, how long before it was their turn. They wouldn't have to wonder for long. By July 1794, even Robespierre's allies had grown tired of living in fear. The man who had orchestrated the reign of terror was now its most feared figure. On July the 27th, 1794, during a tense meeting at the National Convention, the elected assembly that governed France after the fall of the monarchy, his enemies struck first. Robespierre was declared an outlaw. He tried to speak in his defense, but in the chaos, he was shot in the jaw, silencing him forever. Dragged through the streets of Paris, Robespierre was thrown onto the same scaffold he had sent so many to. The executioner removed the blood-soaked bandage from his shattered jaw, exposing his final agony. As the blade fell, the crowd that had once cheered for him now erupted in celebration. The reign of terror was over. Join us for part 4, and the last exciting chapter in this captivating moment in history coming soon. If you haven't already, like and subscribe and tell us in the comments your thoughts on the events of the French Revolution.